McGraw-Hill Professional presents The Lean CEO, Leading the Way to World-Class Excellence, written by Jacob Stoller, narrated by Jim Tedder. Forward by Daniel P. Malloy, Governor, State of Connecticut. When I finished law school in 1980 and began my career as a district attorney, the lean movement was just starting to reach public consciousness in the United States. The wake-up call for many of us was NBC's documentary, If Japan Can, Why Can't We?, which chronicled how Japan, led by Toyota, was overtaking the United States as an industrial power. Although the management philosophy was not identified as lean until a decade later, it was clear that there was a systematic approach behind Japan's commercial success that was radically different from what the business community was practicing in the United States. Those watching the broadcast were probably surprised to learn that many of Japan's secrets came from W. Edwards Deming, an American who had been all but ignored in this country. Deming had traveled to Japan as a consultant, assisting Douglas MacArthur's post-World War II reconstruction efforts, and by the 1960s he was a national hero there. Throughout the 1980s, signs of lean management began surfacing in our industrial sector, including the use of methods such as total quality management, TQM, and just-in-time, JIT. By the 1990s, a small group of American companies had begun to use the Toyota Production System, TPS, which became the prototype for lean. What many didn't realize was that this new approach was much more than a set of shop floor methods. It represented a reinvention of the way companies manage all their operations. This meant that lean could, and soon would, be applied to service industries, healthcare, and government. As Governor of Connecticut, I am also effectively the state's CEO, and can draw parallels between my role and those of my counterparts in the private sector. As we strive to make state government leaner and more cost-effective in the face of a tough budget and a challenging economy, it is clear that government is not exempt from the same belt-tightening measures being made in corporations and households across the country. Simply put, we know we must find ways to do more with less, while still being responsive to taxpayers. When I took office, I directed all executive branch agencies to implement lean methods to get routine activities functioning smoothly and consistently, and to free up staff members' time so they could focus on higher-value tasks that are more directly linked to meeting the needs of citizens. Connecticut is not alone. We are one of 15 states that have embraced the lean approach, and we regularly share resources and compare notes with our colleagues in other states and in the federal government, and with our partners in the private sector. Since implementing lean methods, we have seen significant and encouraging progress in our efforts to attain a smaller, more efficient executive branch, efforts that, to date, have saved over $2 billion in taxpayer dollars. For example, our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection cut the approval time for coastal projects by half and reduced processing time for 12 of its permits by 74%. Another lean team streamlined processes at our Department of Revenue Services by reducing the levels of management at the agency, eliminating 2 standalone business units, and cutting annual operational costs by $8.25 million, all done without laying people off. Although the implementation of lean at our state agencies is being led by the commissioners, much of the change and improvement we have achieved stems from the input of many hard-working front-line state employees. This is important to note because lean was founded on a profound respect for people and the understanding that when workers are consulted, they become more engaged, enthusiastic, and innovative. In fact, the improvements that allowed Toyota to multiply its productivity were not designed in engineering offices, but right on the shop floor by frontline workers. The underlying assumption here is that the deepest understanding of how to improve a process does not come from management, but from the workers who go through those processes day in and day out. Although we have made great strides to modernize state government, achieve quantifiable savings, and streamline various state agency processes, we still have more work to do. This is only the beginning of an ongoing, expansive, and fundamental transformation of Connecticut's state government. As we continue on our path to enhance the effectiveness, efficiency, and timeliness of the processes we use every day in state government, we are proud to have some great role models to look to right here in Connecticut. This includes one of the most successful lean companies in the world, United Technologies Corporation. Two Hartford area companies whose stories are told in this book were among the first North American companies to bring in lean experts from Japan. Both of these companies achieved extraordinary results, and in the ensuing decades, they served as mentors for a select group of American companies. Lean, however, comes with a caveat. As with most new ideas, there is a tendency to adopt it superficially, as another flavor of the month. Even worse, if it is implemented purely as a cost-cutting measure, it will lead to alienation of workers and unsustainable results. The good news is that Lean uses simple conceptual tools. Although it doesn't take a large investment to get started, successfully implementing Lean requires sustained and determined leadership spearheading a disciplined and continuous improvement program to ultimately change the culture throughout an organization. The pages you are about to read feature narratives from CEOs in various sectors who personally championed Lean. Their experience provides solid evidence that our factories can compete globally, our healthcare system can be affordable, sustainable, and safe, and all levels of our governments can provide the efficient, high-quality services that citizens deserve. By empowering our people to improve the processes that define their workplace, we can tap a powerful force that will lead the way to a stronger, more prosperous world. Preface. One of the most promising developments in modern business history has been the emergence of the global Lean movement, which was founded on the practices that vaulted Japan to manufacturing stardom in the late 1970s. Today, the Lean approach has a remarkable track record for helping organizations do more with less, and it is rapidly gaining ground in non-industrial sectors, such as healthcare, government, and financial services. Most people, however, see Lean as merely a set of tactical methods, and most organizations that practice Lean do so superficially. Typically, a company might undertake a series of Lean projects to reduce costs, cut down on defects, or solve a bottleneck in a manufacturing process. These isolated attempts rarely result in real change, and invariably lead to the abandonment of Lean for the next flavor of the month. Lean's true potential to build world-class performance depends on a commitment to continuous improvement that involves every worker in the organization and requires uncommon discipline and persistence. The basic tenets of Lean, moreover, challenge many aspects of traditional management theory and call for a mindset that is foreign to most executives. Lean is, therefore, a tough sell in the boardroom, and CEOs who actively lead Lean transformations are the exception rather than the rule. A popular rule of thumb in the Lean community is that 95% of Lean transformations fail from lack of senior management support. The successes of the remaining 5%, however, are often stunning. Lean organizations routinely achieve results such as the doubling of capacity with existing resources, the reduction of lead times to a fraction of what they were, or a dramatic rise to leadership in their sector. In many cases, these gains lead to a complete financial turnaround. But this isn't just about making numbers. Lean empowers employees, builds closer bonds with customers and suppliers, removes silos, creates transparency, and helps build a sustainable future. To evoke a popular cliché, Lean builds great companies. The Lean CEOs. The 28 Lean CEOs you are about to hear from speak from a remarkable vantage point. Together, they represent a brain trust of leaders from a variety of backgrounds and organizations who share a common experience. They have followed a path that diverges from convention, and they have done so with considerable success. Accordingly, their insights provide a fresh perspective on the challenges facing businesses today. Absent are the time-worn formulas, the corporate speak, and the empty phrases. Their narratives are all about execution and reflect a realism that is all too rare in the business world. These Lean CEOs openly challenge many common business practices, such as standard cost accounting, top-down management, emphasis on batch sizes and economies of scale, and our modern obsession with data and computers. Their criticism carries the authority of practical leaders who have walked the talk. Many starting points, one journey. Taiichi Ohno, one of the founding fathers of Lean, began his work in the almost impossible circumstances of post-World War II Japan. "I strongly believe that necessity is the mother of invention," he said in his book, The Toyota Production System. Even today, improvements at Toyota plants are made based on need. The key to progress in production improvement, I feel, is letting the plant people feel the need. Ohno's belief is borne out by the CEO experiences in this book. In each case, Lean was adopted in response to a pressing business need. The burning platforms, as we call them, are highly diverse, demonstrating Lean's applicability to a wide range of business problems. The core content of the book is organized according to the following burning platforms. A new way out of financial crisis. Capacity without capital expenditure. A realistic approach to worker motivation. Building collaborative management teams. Putting people first. Building the learning organization. Integrating a diversified corporation. Reducing dependence on the CEO. Solving the cost-quality conundrum in healthcare. Defining and delivering value in government. These categorizations come with an important caveat. They are by no means mutually exclusive. The desire to increase capacity, for example, does not preclude the desire to create a learning organization, nor does a need to reduce costs preclude people-centric leadership. Lean is a holistic undertaking that works to address these issues simultaneously. The Lean CEOs profiled in this book had broad objectives and beliefs that went far beyond the addressing the circumstances they faced at the outset of their Lean journeys. How to use this book. This book is concerned with the CEO role. Therefore, there is particular interest in boardroom conversations, relationships between workers and managers, company finances, engagement with customers and business partners, change management, and the way a CEO approaches the general topic of leadership. In other words, how do the traditional challenges that leaders face play out within the context of Lean? My role as author has been to provide structure and context for the CEO narratives that form the core content of this book. I think readers will agree that the messages coming from the CEOs are extremely powerful in their own right. Therefore, I have tried to step back and let the CEOs speak for themselves. Those new to Lean should be advised that this is not a Lean primer. Although the early chapters give a cursory overview of Lean to provide context for the stories, they do not address the huge extent of the work involved in a Lean transformation. It is suggested, therefore, that those unfamiliar with Lean acquire at least one book from the reading list to use as a reference guide or to read in parallel. These books are, by the way, first-rate. Books, however, don't tell the full story about Lean, and as anybody in the Lean world will confirm, going to Gemba, the workplace where customer value is actually created, is essential. I therefore urge the reader who has not done so to visit at least one Lean organization. Finding one is not difficult. There is a vibrant global community built around the sharing of Lean ideas, and organizations such as the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, AME, and the Lean Enterprise Institute, LEI, organize frequent tours. It is very much in the spirit of Lean to ask why repeatedly, and I would urge the reader to approach this material with a few questions in mind. Here are several suggestions. What skills, methods, and personal attributes do CEOs need to effectively lead a Lean transformation? How, in conventional terms, do Lean transformations change companies for the better? What are the implications for our organization? I hope the reader will add many more. One important note. Although Lean is often discussed in conjunction with Six Sigma, there is no discussion of Six Sigma in this book. The reason is that it rarely came up in my research. I recognize that Six Sigma is widely practiced, and I will leave it to other authors to explore that subject and its relationship with Lean. One final exhortation. Some will be tempted to jump right into the stories that involve their sector and ignore the rest. I would urge the reader to do the opposite. As CEOs say over and over in the book, their most important learnings often came from other industries. Thus, if you're going to read selectively, leave your own sector for last. Now, let's get on with our story. Chapter 1. How Waste Became Business as Usual. Take a look at the following three scenarios. A recreational trailer manufacturer was forced into bankruptcy after revenues dropped 60% during the 2009 recession. A medium-sized hospital closed its doors amid rising costs, quality concerns, and growing competition from larger providers. A manufacturer of diesel engine components, dogged by chronic delivery problems, poor labor relations, and the loss of a key patent, shut down its plant and sold its assets to a large automotive manufacturer. Scenarios like these are, sadly, not unusual. Layoffs, plant closings, downsizings, cutbacks, and offshoring are so common that they no longer have any shock value. There's a certain air of inevitability to it all. We just say, too bad, and move on. In the meantime, millions of lives are thrown into turmoil. There's a twist to these three scenarios above, however. They never happened. In each case, the CEO defied the odds after discovering and adopting Lean. The results were astonishing. The organizations excelled not only in terms of financial performance, but also in areas such as employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and influence in the business community. You will meet these Lean CEOs and many others in the pages ahead. The CEOs, however, did not just apply a method. They adopted a way of thinking that is fundamentally different from what is taught in business schools. Through this new set of glasses, they began to see their situations very differently. Instead of viewing their challenges as circumstances beyond their control, they saw how their organizations were laboring under a heavy burden of wasteful processes. We're not talking about losses of a few percentage points here or there, This is waste on a monumental scale, enough to sink a company. Waste, as seen through the lean lens, is not something that can be eradicated with the stroke of a pen. Instead, it is distributed throughout the organization, often in small, barely visible increments. It takes enormous discipline to see it, more to eliminate it, and constant vigilance to prevent it from creeping back in. Waste removal, as will be shown, is an activity that requires the participation of every employee in the organization and a corporate-wide commitment to continuous improvement that never ends. To see the waste, the lean CEOs turned much of their attention to an aspect of the organization that is neglected in modern business theory, so much so that we don't have a name for it. The Japanese, however, do have a word, gemba, which means the real place. In the lean context, this means the place where people create a product or service that customers pay for. In an automotive factory, for example, gemba is the shop floor where people make cars. In a school, gemba is the classroom where teachers help students learn. In a hospital, gemba is found wherever doctors, nurses, or support staff members are providing care to patients. Through the lean lens, everything else, administration, finance, human resources, sales, and even senior management, is there to support gemba. Respect for the people who spend their days in gemba is one of the cornerstones of lean. It is through their initiative that the breakthrough gains that characterize successful lean transformations are achieved. To empower this kind of participation, managers need to quickly rid themselves of the illusion that they know all the answers. On the contrary, lean CEOs must be constantly inquiring and must do so openly. All this goes against the grain of conventional management thinking. Managers are taught that by applying the professional skills they learned in business school, they can control what happens in gemba without actually being there. Gemba is something to be delegated, outsourced, managed from a distance. Furthermore, the employees in gemba are seen to be dispensable cogs rather than strategic assets. Yet, gemba is the aspect of any organization that has the most direct impact on the value that customers pay for. A customer can't buy a great product design, a go-to-market strategy, or a powerful brand. In the end, the company has to deliver, and the work that makes this possible is ultimately the purpose and the livelihood of the organization. This work happens in gemba. Neglect of gemba and the people who work in it is behind many of the failures we hear about in the news. It's why North America has the best healthcare resources in the world, but is struggling to deliver an affordable healthcare system. It's why U.S. automotive manufacturers filed for bankruptcy in 2008. To understand how managers lost sight of something as fundamental as gemba and became blind to the widespread waste in modern organizations, we have to go back a century or so. The miracle of mass production. The American industrial golden age, which was to end in the 1970s, began when Henry Ford opened his first factory in 1908. Like his mentor, Thomas Alva Edison, Ford was an impassioned experimenter. He loved machinery and the art of fabrication, and developed the Model T with his own hands. Gemba was near and dear to him. Ford was always convinced that there was a better way. When he designed his first factory, Ford believed that he could make cars faster, cheaper, and of better quality than the manufacturers of that day. He was certain that the key to doing this was eliminating waste. Ford had watched workers in other plants very closely, and had noticed that they spent perhaps half their time transporting parts, retrieving tools, and waiting for workpieces to arrive, activities that did nothing to directly improve the product that would eventually be owned by a customer. If an activity didn't involve the worker having his or her hands on the product, Ford saw this as a waste, and he believed he could make great strides in efficiency by reducing such waste. Much of this wasted human effort resulted from the way machinery was located on the plant floor. Machine tools got their power from huge steam-propelled line shafts that ran through the facilities, and layouts were determined by the most efficient way to deliver power to the equipment. Because those configurations were inflexible and had little to do with workflow, almost half of plant workers were hired solely to move materials around the plant. Electricity changed all this. When Ford built the company's iconic Highland Park facility in 1908, manufacturers were beginning to use electrically powered tools that could be located anywhere in the plant, and factory planners were beginning to pay more attention to the optimum location of a machine in relation to the workflow. The Edison Illuminating Company of Detroit was a leading proponent of the electrical revolution, and Ford's close connection with that company put him right on top of this trend. The electrification of the assembly line at Ford Motor Company's Highland Park plant radically altered the U.S. automobile industry, wrote Canadian economist Bernard C. Boudreau. The relationship between inputs and outputs was changed forever. Moreover, work would never be the same. This innovation made possible what is considered the company's greatest accomplishment, the moving assembly line. The system was developed by Charles E. Sorensen, a pattern maker from Denmark who had joined the company in 1905. Sorensen quickly became a principal with no particular title. His job was simply to invent a production system that would reduce waste to the absolute minimum. Sorensen, who tells his story in one of the definitive accounts of the company's rise, My 40 Years with Ford, inherited a system whereby the vehicle was stationary, and workers and parts traveled to the workpiece successively until it was completed and could be driven out of the plant. Sorensen began to experiment with something completely different. What was worked out at Ford was the practice of moving the work from one worker to another until it became a complete unity, then arranging the flow of these units at the right time and the right place to a moving final assembly line from which came a finished product. Sorensen arrived at the moving assembly line through a series of weekend experiments conducted with the assistance of Charles Lewis, another Ford executive. The idea occurred to me that assembly would be easier, simpler, and faster if we moved the chassis along, beginning at one end of the plant with the frame and adding the axles and the wheels, then moving it past the stockroom instead of moving the stockroom to the chassis. I had Lewis arrange the materials on the floor so that what was needed at the start of assembly would be at the end of the building, and the other parts would be along the line as we moved the chassis along. We spent every Sunday during July planning this. Then, one Sunday morning, after the stock was laid out in this fashion, Lewis and I and a couple of helpers put together the first car, I'm sure, that was ever built on a moving line. The new production system that grew out of these experiments entailed far more than a reconfigured floor plan. Equally important was the set of principles by which the factory was run. Ford recognized that high productivity was not a matter of telling workers to work harder, but of designing work processes in a way that would enable workers to be as productive as possible. The thing is to keep everything in motion and take the work to the man and not the man to the work, Ford said in his book Today and Tomorrow. That is the real principle of our production, and conveyors are only one of the means to an end. The system was continually improved to achieve this. Tool counters were eliminated, and tools were brought to workers instead. Even the extra motion of picking up the workpiece from the floor was a target for elimination. Stooping to the floor to pick up a tool or a part is not productive labor. Therefore, all material is delivered waist high. Waste of materials was also targeted. Ford, noting that the company's salvage department was reclaiming upward of $20 million a year in materials, wondered why all that material had been wasted in the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?